everybody. I'm Sean Reynolds from Sportsnet, about to be joined by Ken Weave from Sportsnet. Together we are Kenny and Renny, and this is a special edition, a pop-up version of the Kenny and Renny show. And you know when it is a pop-up version of the show that there is big news afoot, and that is exactly what is happening here today. First off, let me just say we are lucky it's a rainy day, because if it wasn't, Ken Weave would probably be out on a golf course somewhere, and I wouldn't be able to get through to him on his phone, because the guy is just so zeroed in and so focused out on the golf course that I'm not sure that he would even pick up if if that phone was buzzing in his golf bag. Good thing it's raining, because he was there. We already did some work for Sportsnet, but we were there to pick up on the news, which I think is an absolute bombshell. Blake Wheeler stripped of his captaincy of the Winnipeg Jets. Now, that sounds like a pretty aggressive way of putting it. I don't know how you want to put it, but either way, Blake Wheeler is no longer the captain of the Winnipeg Jets. Unclear the role he is going to play when it comes to letters going forward. I don't necessarily know that this means he won't wear a letter or be part of the official leadership group of the Winnipeg Jets as represented by an A. We'll get into all that kind of stuff. And, if we're going to get into that kind of stuff, the best way to do that is with our main man, Ken Weave. So let's get him into the show here. It's been too long. Here comes Kenny. Kenny, the Hunter Lamenda here, with feeling the same way I did. Kenny took a day off from golfing, surprising. I knew the rain was going to knock things down a little bit for you, but it was good to see the rain. And what a day at the rink. I know that when I first found the news, now it's one of these situations where the news itself is maybe not so much something that, we were talking. I know that I was on Hustler's podcast throughout the summer. You were as well. And we talked about the question of, maybe a potential leadership change on this team. So I don't think we should all be approaching this as though this is something that is a massive, massive surprise. But at the same time, when news like this comes down, when an established captain in the NHL is relieved of that role but remains with the team, it's always massive news. Let's just open the floor right up to you and get an idea of what you make of this.
Yes, great to be with you. And first of all, I do resent, I know you're kidding, but I did text you with the news today, so I wasn't worried about the golf. I would have been any news of this magnitude. I'm on work mode now, although we're trying to squeeze out the old Manitoba Golf Tour to have a few more stops. But it was certainly, again, surprise. It put me in the Blake Wheeler category. I was a little bit surprised at this news. I have said previously that the only way Blake wouldn't be the captain of the Winnipeg Jets is if he went in and said he felt that was a burden and one that he was no longer comfortable doing.
Carrying.
But Blake made it clear that there was a burden. But let's also make no mistake, this was not Blake Wheeler going in and saying, I'm done with being captain of the Winnipeg Jets. This was a decision made by the coaching staff. And Blake made it clear that, he's going to do his best and he's not going to change who he is or how he acts or how he leads. But this is big news. There's no doubt about that. We know this has happened to other teams in recent memory. San Jose, I think, removed both Joe Thornton and Patrick Marleau of their captaincy duties before giving it to Joe Pavelski. And in 2016, we were both, I think, we were both at times covering that San Jose St. Louis Blues series, and things worked out okay for them. Dustin Brown's another guy this has happened to. Blake didn't make it sound like he was going to be reaching out to any of those three people when I asked him if he was going to, was curious about their thoughts and how they handled the transition. It was an interesting day today. I know we're going to dig deep into it, but I'm going to turn the floor. But I'm not going to go too long at the buffet here, but certainly do have a lot of thoughts. And To me, the timing is very interesting, A, and B, important. A, neither Rick Bowness or Blake Wheeler said when this meeting took place. Blake hinted that it was the first conversation that they had together that this was brought up in. So does that mean the Jets have been sitting on this news, or that the conversation happened more recently, which is a possibility? We know that around the time when Rick Bowness was announced as head coach, Blake Wheeler was someone he had not spoken to yet. They had traded, they missed phone calls. Blake had texted him back, but they hadn't really connected. So the timing is interesting on that front. And secondly, the timing to me, I think this is important that this was happened before training camp, Sean, rather than this being the story of the day on day one of training camp. Rick Bowness talked about the importance of leaving last year in the past, and by kind of getting in front of this by making this announcement today instead of next Thursday is an important step in the process for the Jets in terms of moving forward. But I'm very curious to see how people respond, what it's going to be like, and this means that Blake won't be speaking to us as often. That's true. But there sure are going to be a lot of eyes on Blake Wheeler. He said all the right things today, but people are going to see where he fits into this entire equation. That was something, Sean, you asked him, and Blake didn't sound like he wanted to go down that road. And when he did, he said, my role's not changing. But to me, I think his ice time will be changing, and I still think he will lead by example, but I think things are changing for the Winnipeg Jets.
I love that. You said you weren't going to go the buffet too long, but what I love about it is when you do it, you take it in so many different directions. There's so many directions to kind of play off what you just did there. But I think for me, where I'll start is I got the impression that this feels to me like it is a more recent thing. I got the impression that Blake, when he was talking about his first conversation, I thought it was a first face-to-face meeting conversation. And one of the reasons I say that is because Rick Bowness talked about the progression that he had to get to the idea that he was going to do this. And he said he wanted to talk to all the players first. I highly doubt that he talked to all the players on the Winnipeg Jets, and Blake Wheeler is the last guy he talked to. I feel like there was a conversation in the summertime between Blake Wheeler and Rick Bowness. That happened a while ago. Now the process of guys getting back into town, having these conversations, Rick Bowness went through the idea of talking with all the different Winnipeg Jets to kind of get their take on the room and what was going on, and a room that he talked about having problems. I mean, anyone out there, this is the one thing, Ken, when you talk to people will talk about whether or not there was like problems in the room last year. And Mark Scheifele kind of seemed to pour water on that in his first availability this year. Rick Bowness came out right and said it, that, he says, I wasn't here. I don't know what happened, but something went wrong in that room last year, right? It's something that he needs to address. But to get back to it, to me, it seems pretty clear this was a recent thing. It feels like the first face-to-face meeting between Blake Wheeler and Rick Bowness is where this happened. That's why I think if you hear about the surprise angle from Blake, Mark Scheifele, who we'll get to in the conversation about him addressing this today, Mark Scheifele talked about getting a phone call recently from Blake Wheeler. So to me, this is a very recent thing. And just by the way that Blake Wheeler responded to this, I don't think this is something that the Jets have been sitting on all summer. I think this is a recent decision come from Rick Bowness. And boy, oh boy, it sure is something. Now, there's a ton of different directions that we can take this. But I think the first place I want to go with my comments is there is no doubt about who is in charge of the Winnipeg Jets dressing room right now. Rick Bowness walked in here, has taken this room and made it absolutely abundantly clear he's the guy. He's in charge. He's not afraid to make tough decisions because Ken, this is a tough decision. It's funny. I got a text here. I think if you take a look on Twitter, if you see the people that we're talking to, there's like a little bit of a division here. I think a lot of fans think that this is a really good thing heading into the season. And there's a lot of fans that are saying, whoa, what a terrible way to start the season. Regardless, this has the potential to be volatile. And you've got Rick Bowness, who's walked in here, takes a look, at the landscape of this team, talks to the players on this team, and definitively decides that this team is better off without Blake Wheeler wearing the C, and makes that decision right out of the gate, has that conversation with the captain, and then the captain comes out and has to address this afterwards. I thought Blake handled it really well, which leads me to believe that Rick Bowness, who is known for having hard conversations with his players, but at the same time earning respect back from those players, not alienating those players. I think this is a first example of that. If you're any other Winnipeg Jet on this team, on this roster, you're taking a look at what the new sheriff in town just did with a guy who is a power broker and maybe had, a little bit of unchecked power at times in the past based on the last coaching group that we saw here. There is no doubt about it. This is, to me, is a clear message. If you are a Winnipeg Jet player, there's a new boss in town. And he's going to call things exactly how he sees them.
Yeah, and the one thing that Rick made clear himself during his conversation with us was that he wants to make this more of a, collective, right? I mean, whereas before it was maybe Wheeler's voice was I'm not saying Blake's voice was the only voice, but it certainly was the strongest voice. And while he did say all the right things about Blake and still being an important part of the team and being an important leader, I think he also made us see that he wants there to be more oxygen available for other parties in order to exert some of their own leadership, abilities, for lack of a better term. And it'll be interesting to see how all those people handle that role. I mean, have there been people that have been, felt like they were being held back when it comes to those sorts of things? What we know is that there is a lot of leadership available, like leadership roles to be filled. There are a lot of them. I mean, Paul Stastny's not here. Andrew Kopp is not here. They were part of the leadership group last year. I loved what I saw from a lot of players late last year when it comes to that accountability piece, where they were taking ownership and all of those things. So do you see other guys really spread their wings under a situation like this? It's certainly possible. But yeah, I mean, the dynamic is definitely interesting. And again, too, we said this is one of those situations where it's not an example of burying the lead, but one of the other things that really stood out for me, Sean, and we'll get to it later on, and then we'll circle back to this, but I mean, the fact that Blake was open with the notion that he was actually not just involved in speculation, that he was actively discussing the potential to have a separation from the Winnipeg Jets and to be moved on, and that they came to the situation where Blake is very much on board with staying now. But Sean, I don't know about you, but to me, I thought Blake was going to say, that's none of your business when the question was brought up earlier on, but he wanted to talk about it, and he left no stone unturned where it came to what happened and where he stands in terms of being in a situation where he's comfortable with everything that he's gone through, even though there was a chance that both sides were going to have not just a separation in terms of a letter, but a full divorce from one another. But now they're ready to take it forward in however direction it looks moving forward, now that Blake's not the captain.
Well, since we've landed on that, let's talk about the trade news right now, just to kind of clarify.
Sure.
Blake Wheeler didn't shy away from the idea that in the offseason, there was a pursuit for a trade. So all these rumors that we heard, and again, this kind of goes back to me, but I just thought it was really strange when Mark Scheifele came out and spoke a little while ago and tried to make it sound like everything was blown out of proportion and the media was being the media, and it's a really tight room and there's really no issues. Again, Rick Bowness saying today that like there was an issue in the room and it's something that they're dealing with. And then when you hear about that, you hear about the idea of, it was Mark Scheifele who talked about heading into the offseason that he kind of needed to see where this team was going and reassess his relationship with the team. People kind of blew up about that. Well, that is exactly what Blake Wheeler said this time around, that after 11 years, maybe it was time to reassess what this relationship looked like. Now, he says he's landed on the idea that he's a Winnipeg Jet. He's going to stay here. And that's fine. That's where we've landed on. How they landed on it, hey, There could be a lot of different things. Maybe they tried to move Blake Wheeler. Maybe it didn't happen, right? Like this isn't necessarily saying that the Winnipeg Jets sat around in the offseason and that the brain trust sat around a table and explored the idea of trading Wheeler, and then at some point someone stood up and said, guys, what the heck are we doing here? We can't trade this guy. He needs to stay here. Like, doesn't mean that happened. Maybe it means that there weren't any takers, or maybe it means that in order for someone to take him, it was just too much for the Winnipeg Jets to swallow. Regardless, he's back. It may not necessarily mean he's back because everyone just took a step back and said, you know what, we don't want to do this. We want to stick around. It may have not just worked out. But I thought, and he's in the chat room, and I want to give him props. I gave him props in person afterwards. But Scotty Billick asked a phenomenal follow-up question to Blake Wheeler about the idea that, look, if in the offseason you were okay with exploring leaving Winnipeg, do you not think that maybe in some ways that disqualifies you from being the captain of this team? If you were trying to get out, or if you were okay with getting out and leaving, don't you think maybe just that in itself says that this team should probably be looking in a different direction? Ken, I pose that question to you because I think it's a fascinating question that Scott asked.
Yeah, it's certainly a valuable question. My personal thought is that it doesn't necessarily disqualify him. It doesn't mean he's not invested. It means he was open. I want to use this example. Back in, I think it was 2012 or 2013, Marty St. Louis was traded for Ryan Callahan. Two captains traded for one another. I don't think that they were good one, Scotty. Yeah, that was a good question. Both of them were good questions, and you beat me to the first one. And you definitely beat me to the second one, and good job on you for that. Ryan Callahan and Martin St. Louis were traded for one another, I think, at the deadline that year. And both teams kind of benefited from the deal. And that doesn't mean that either one had been tired of leading the team that they were with at the time. But it's super interesting. And I also, like I said, Blake was also very vehement in his response to your question about whether his role would be changing. Sean, what we know, not only was Rick Bowness brought in to help integrate the young defenseman on the back end, part of his responsibility is to handle the grenade that is telling Blake Wheeler that his role is going to be reduced. And I'm not talking about a demotion from the first line to the fourth line, not even to the third line, but Blake's minutes are going to be reduced this year. Whether that's by a minute and a half or 2 minutes, that remains to be seen. But to me, I think it's easier to do that if Blake is not the captain, right? The captain is put on a pedestal. It's hard to tell the captain you're playing 2 minutes less. You're now on the second line. But Rick handled this grenade incredibly well in Dallas with Jamie Benn and Tyler Seguin. So I think that it was important that they, at the timing of this deal, it's not a distraction when training camp begins. I don't think it disqualifies him necessarily, but I can understand why, if you're Rick Bowness, you want to make you've like you said, Sean, Rick Bowness put his stamp on the Winnipeg Jets before the doors even opened for training camp. And you know what that does? We've all been on teams where message sending happens, and coaches always say now, oh, you're reading too much into it, and that wasn't to send a message. Don't fool yourself. This was a message that is being sent. It's not sent only to Blake Wheeler. This is sent to an entire team that got a little bit too comfortable over the years, and now things are changing. And it's also an opportunity. This is not blaming Blake Wheeler for the Jets' lot in life, because that is unfair and inaccurate. What it does do is allow some of the other players on the periphery of the leadership group to continue to take ownership and to have a stronger voice. There's more oxygen in the room now after this decision was made, and now it's about how those players handle that additional responsibility. And conversely, Sean, I would also say, Blake would never say it to us, but I think this actually might help bring Blake Wheeler to a place where he can take an exhale and a deep breath and just focuses on playing hockey. Because you know what? Blake Wheeler's a really good hockey player that's been a productive player for a long time. And now instead of trying to get allies and not wondering when it's time to allow an alternate to speak, now we can just speak when it feels like the right time for speaking and just lead by example, because that's something that Blake Wheeler doesn't have trouble leading by example. It's one of the things that he does best, in my humble opinion.
A couple of different directions I want to take that. First of all, the bonus message sending thing. I do think a big message was sent here today, but here's what I think is an important distinction. I think Rick Bowness sends messages just by doing what he thinks are the right thing, right? Like, I don't think for a second that Rick Bowness was like, this team needs a shakeup, so I'm going to take a big swing. I just think that, when you get into a place where you're coaching and you've got an idea of that, like, this is what's going to work, this is what's going to work, this is what's going to work. A lot of times, managers, coaches, whoever you are, whether you're in business or not, that sometimes I need to do this for things to work. I need to do this. I need to do this. And this are going to be like, I'll just put that in and no one will notice. But when I make this change, it's going to be like a bomb dropping. And a lot of people, I think, get a little bit antsy or maybe scared, or sometimes don't make that decision because they're not okay with the bomb dropping. I think what we saw here from Rick Bowness is that he's not trying to send a message, but it doesn't mean he doesn't know that this move that he's making, which he thinks is the right move, does not have the added benefit of sending a message and, having players either fall in line or understand the idea of what's expected from them. So I do think that's really interesting, because I think Rick Bowness just is methodically going through this and thinks, this is what I'm going to need to do for this team to succeed. And he decided taking the captaincy away from Blake Wheeler was that thing. And I think in the Paul Maurice era, the idea of dropping big bombs, like benching star players when they hadn't deserved the ice time, or maybe when they needed it, he just didn't get around to that, because I don't think Paul Maurice was a guy who liked dropping big bombs, or maybe thought that dropping big bombs was going to be detrimental. Rick Bowness just showed us dropping big bombs is going to be part of what he'll do if he thinks that needs to be done. So I think that's really fascinating. Go on.
Just a quick one. Just to clarify, I don't think Rick sent a message for the sake of sending a message.
No,
I agree with you completely.
I know.
He sent a message because he felt one needed to be sent.
Yeah, exactly. And then I wanted to go into the other part of this, the idea of more oxygen in the room. Okay, so this is how this is being sold, not just by the organization, but by Rick Bowness himself. And I had asked the question, and I still think that in the end, this is the big question that went unanswered. Rick Bowness, pretty much handles almost everything, or he at the very least says, Ken, as you were pushing him to find out, who the associate or alternate captains would be. He just basically kept saying, wait and see. I'm not telling you right now. Wait and see means, I think this was his line to you, wait and see doesn't mean I don't know. It means you're going to have to wait for me to tell you, because I'm not ready to tell you yet. I like that line. But I think the big unanswered question here was, why does Blake Wheeler need to be removed from the forefront in order to create more oxygen for everyone else? And like, it almost sounds like, listen, Blake Wheeler is being punished because other players on this team can't stand up, or can't assume this responsibility. That's one way of looking at this, right? Jeff Hamilton and I were talking about this before. When I first saw the press release, I thought, this doesn't make sense, and it sounds to me like a made-up excuse. We're taking our captain out of his role because other players need to step up more. Why would you punish the captain because these players aren't stepping up, is one way of looking at it. The more oxygen thing, I think, is the big question. Why is there a need to remove Blake Wheeler in order to provide more oxygen for the rest of these players to stand up and take a leadership role? Was he not giving enough space for other players to take enough ownership of this team?
Yeah, again, this is something that it's difficult to really fully know, because we're not in the room, and we haven't been in the room for 2 years, but we're happy to be going back into the room to hopefully be having some conversations that maybe could lead to some of these answers. But what I would say is this, Sean, I think that the Jets are a team in transition. I think their personality has changed. I think that Blake was a very effective captain at certain times of his tenure. I think that the team was in a place where they needed that ultra serious nature. But I think the Jets have evolved into a situation where they're more of a happy go lucky team now. And although Blake didn't like Murat Atesh's assessment about Blake being on a bit of a leadership island, I
Mm-hmm.
think he is on a bit of a leadership island, especially with Paul Stastny being gone, where that old school nature that, dialed in and wired, as Paul Maurice used to say, 24/7. I don't know that this group is responding in the same way to that kind of leadership. And Blake himself said he's been taking time to evolve as a leader, but ultimately he is a guy who is incredibly intense. The Jets have more of a fun loving group and maybe a little bit more of a high joy level group. And let's be honest, I was talking about this with Hustler earlier today. Blake has not been a happy person at the rink, which used to be his happy place. And part of that was the burden of being a captain in an NHL market wherein his team had underachieved for parts of that, especially recently. So I think he'll benefit from that as well. But what that means for the others in the room, it means that this is an open, like you talk about messages. This is an open invitation for you to take ownership in the Winnipeg Jets and their future, in my humble estimation. So to me, naturally we talked about this on our hit. I mean, who are the guys that are going to be wearing letters? I mean, is it two? Is it four guys? Is it six guys that are going to be rotated? I mean, where do guys stand? I mean, not all people need to wear a letter in order to lead. We've seen that from the Jets before. We'll see it again in the fall. But I'm very curious, and Rick Bowness basically said it without saying it. They want to see which players are ready to lead by what they bring on a daily basis when it comes to work habits, when it comes to how they interact with players, coaches, equipment managers, and trainers, regular staff, arena staff, all of those things. I mean, Rick is very much a people person. Would probably make a great psychologist. He's all about how you interact and what you bring to the table, all of those things. So to me, I think he's going to be looking for guys to step up. And that's why I say when there's more oxygen available, it just means that players, they don't need to be told that there's an opportunity to take on a leadership role. It's there for the taking. So it'll be interesting to see how certain players respond. And I expect some of them will embrace this fully. And we'll see which way it goes. But I mean, I don't think the Jets are bereft of leadership candidates. I think there's lots of good candidates to wear letters. Some of them would make great captains. Some of them probably best in an alternate role. But there's lots of guys here. If people are saying, oh, the Jets don't have enough leaders, I would not, if I'm Rick Bowness, I'm not worried about there being enough leadership. And I'm not worried about people buying in or having that collective type of atmosphere or attitude. But now it's about showing it on the ice, in the room, and how the interactions happen. How people buy into the new systems that Rick touched on, and you heard about at the Iceplex earlier this week with Cole Perfetti. Oh, Rick said it out flat out. They're going to be aggressive, more aggressive. And you know what? People, whether you're, if you watch the Jets play, them playing a more aggressive style of game, I think is something that people would welcome. So it's going to be interesting. I mean, this is not it just doesn't naturally happen. Leaders lead. You sometimes have to grow into the role, but I think it's important. I just feel like it was time. I think, like I said, I think Blake's leadership style worked at a certain time. And let's not forget, the Jets enjoyed their greatest success with Blake Wheeler as their captain. So that shouldn't be forgotten either. But at the same time, I think it was time for a different style of leadership for this group moving forward.
Just a couple things. I want to go and explore more the idea of which players could, maybe step up into leadership roles. I think that's an important one. But it's funny. I'll tell you this, Ken. You talk about the Jets becoming a more fun-loving group. And you know what that reminds me of? And I wonder how long, if what you're saying is at the root of what's happening here, I wonder how long this tug of war between a fun-loving, happy hockey group and a really more focused kind of, dogged approach to success, how long this has been brewing. Because when you talk about Winnipeg Jets players in the past who had brought that fun-loving nature, who am I thinking of who's not here anymore right now, Ken?
Say again, sorry. The joy
Well,
level?
if you're talking about players who just loved showing up to the rink and
Oh, sorry.
having fun and
Yes,
being a
Liney.
little goofy, Patrick Laine. And so that's the interesting part of this is I wonder, and we've said this in the past, we had this conversation where it felt, and it was almost like a warning that we talked about when Patrick Laine was leaving. It really did feel like there was a fracture in the dressing room, and he got pushed out in favor of players that took a different kind of approach to the game or didn't appreciate his approach to the game. I'm not going to boil it all down to just this side likes to take, a dogged approach and this side likes to be fun loving. But it does seem a little bit, if that's the direction that this has gone, that Patrick Laine was I don't want to call him a victim, but he was one of the guys who got pushed out because of this philosophy. And maybe that philosophy has run its course and a new coach has come in and decided it's gone in a different direction. If so, then I think we have to take a look at the course that this team has been on under the captaincy of Blake Wheeler and think, who are the people who kind of got crushed under that machine? And that just, I mean, that's just a quick thought on Patrick Laine and maybe some of the other guys that were gone afterwards. But I mean, these are the things I think the questions that we have to pour over a little bit more in the future as this goes, especially if we see a different direction and a different tone in this team. But I mean, I will say this. I take the idea of, guys like Paul Stastny, guys like Nate Schmidt, guys like Sam Gagner, who they just brought in, guys like Brendan Dillon. These have been efforts by Kevin Cheveldayoff to brighten the room, to create a more chipper room, and to create a stronger leadership group for a long time. And I wonder, when you see guys like Patrick Laine get pushed out, when you see attempts to brighten the room through adding different kind of players, how long has this been going on before we get to the idea that this change needed to be made right at the very top because the changes underneath we're not getting the job done? That's just a thought that I don't know if you want to tackle that. I think you've kind of spoken to it. But if you want to talk about it, we can. Otherwise, let's move on to the idea of who you think steps into leadership roles here.
I'm glad you let me mention Laine because I think we need to applaud Jarmo Kekalainen for getting done what a lot of people didn't think would get done. And Patrick Laine locking down,
get done.
Wow. Locking down. I mean, we can say it's only 4 years, but that's a commitment, and I think it's one that both sides will be happy for. And then moving forward from there, I think you basically covered it. In terms of the guys who I think are great candidates to be alternates, I know we'll dig into Mark Scheifele in a minute. I still think Mark keeps his A. I think Josh Morrissey keeps his A. I think guys who would be candidates to have an expanded role in terms of leadership group and wearing letters, I think Nikolai Ehlers and Adam Lowry are two natural fits. I think Kyle Connor is also a natural fit, but I could also see Kyle Connor being one of those guys who just takes ownership and doesn't necessarily have to wear a letter. That's not to say he won't wear one. And I think that Brendan Dillon would be a guy that falls into that same category. Rick Bowness knows that he can lean on Brendan Dillon when it comes to leadership, especially now that he's coming into his second season on the Winnipeg Jets. But those are some of the guys who I see as natural fits to be wearing letters. And I mean, Rick Bowness knows how many it's going to be. And when I pressed him on it, and when I said some teams have 2 at home, 2 on the road, some teams have 3 on each space. I mean, there could be 3, there could be 6. It's probably between that 4 and 6 number. And we'll see what happens. I also think there's going to be guys that end up wearing, that grow into leadership roles that might be ready for letters next year and the year afterwards. So, and again, Pierre-Luc Dubois is a guy who, in any other circumstance, or if you were asking me at the end of last year, I would have made him the first alternate. But because of the uncertainty of his future, again, you can look at it 2 ways. You could say, well, you give him a letter to show him how much he matters. Or if you are giving him a letter, what message are you sending if you don't expect him to be with you longer term, and how do other players react to that? That's something that a coaching staff would have to weigh as well. So I don't necessarily think that, again, I'm not ruling him out, but I don't necessarily say he would be a front runner to wear a letter. I think that the Jets will be looking at guys like Adam Lowry, like Kyle Connor, like Nikolai Ehlers, guys that have committed to the long-term program with the Winnipeg Jets, that they will say, you guys vote, you guys went in with us on a long-term deal. We want to go all in with you as part of that next leadership group. But again, I mean, it'll be interesting to see how the coaching staff views this. I mean, some teams used to take a vote. I mean, how does Rick Bowness feel about that? I mean, whether it was in junior or pro hockey, does he just want to anoint the 6 people or the 4 or whatever it ends up being? So those are people that I think of most often. Again, Nate Schmidt's a guy I think has worn a letter before. He would be, the guy who's a natural fit also, but I don't know that he's necessarily at the front of it. So, and again, speaking of Trouba, Earl's probably making a joke there, but I think it's a kudos to Jacob Trouba. Some people didn't like his exit out of town, but this is a guy who was a leader when he was here, and now he's been named captain of the New York Rangers, and I think it's a smart choice by the coaching staff there in New York.
I'll just weigh in a little bit on the potential candidates, but I want to start by just kind of exploring an idea. I wonder if now that the captaincy era of Blake Wheeler is over, I wonder how the Winnipeg Jets will look back on it, or what lessons they may have learned from it, or maybe they don't believe that there are lessons to be learned. But the interesting part about this is, when we've talked about this, we've spilled plenty of ink. I know it's the wrong analogy, but let's use a newspaper term. We spilled plenty of ink on this show about the idea of Blake Wheeler and his, adversarial kind of approach to dealing with the media. I wonder about that, and I wonder if the Winnipeg Jets look back on that. I wonder if they like that. I wonder if Mark Chipman and Kevin Cheveldayoff, I mean, you go back to them losing in 2019 and him opening up his statements after they lose by telling Paul Friesen, F you, you know what I mean? Something that was never addressed afterwards, which I always thought was a massive mistake, not just by Blake Wheeler, but by the organization, to not expect an apology from a player talking to a journalist who had asked a question that any journalist in that scrum should have been asking at that time. I don't know. I always did get the sense that behind the scenes, I thought that the Jets and the Jets brass and the Jets leadership group liked the fact that Blake Wheeler had an adversarial relationship with the media. I don't know that it was a good thing. Ken, and I've talked about this on the show before. I've talked about this with our people. I think the issue with going after the media is, if the media member, listen, I think to a degree it's easy to punch down on the media if you're a professional athlete, because people adore professional athletes. So if you respond harshly towards a question, a lot of times that I believe the default for fans when they see a professional athlete going after a media member is that the media member got out of line. Why else would this guy, he answers questions all the time, that guy must have got out of line, and the media member is the professional athlete is going after them. I always think of Bryce Harper with his quote, "That's a clown question, bro." When he was less than 21 years old, he was a young baseball player, and he was in Canada, and one of the journalists asked him, "Oh, are you going to go out for a drink?" And he was like, "That's a clown question, bro." It was a clown question, and it was deserving of that response. But the one thing that I've always thought is, I think if an athlete gets comfortable just teeing off on the media no matter what, and I think that Blake Wheeler was very comfortable teeing off on the media, is if that media member is asking a question that is of concern to the fan base, then if you are a person who has the concerns that align with the question that's being asked, and that journalist basically gets told off by the professional athlete, that the fan can feel that they were told off by that professional athlete as well. So I am not the biggest, adversarial when it needs to be adversarial, and it should be. But if it doesn't need to be adversarial, and definitely if it doesn't need to be adversarial, I don't think it's a good plan. And I think that's where things landed. So it'll be interesting to see if the Jets going forward are okay with that, or if they want to put a more softer and more friendly touch on things here. I will say this. You were bringing up, this is a long roundabout way of me getting to the players who I think should be there. Kyle Connor has got better and better and better at being at speaking with the media. He's become a lot more direct, a lot more honest, a lot more comfortable. But I think his natural state is not being overly comfortable with the media. I think he's doing a great job of it. But I think he's not a guy who loves a camera and loves being in front of a camera, nor do I think he ever will be. I do think that needs to be a consideration. Now, I say that because in any other context, a guy who's locked down long term in your city, who is as much of a leader as he's become, especially in the points race and everything, this guy would be a no-brainer. But I do think if you're the Winnipeg Jets, you have to consider the idea that part of that job is getting up in front of the media and having conversations in front of the media. And so when you've got guys like Josh Morrissey, who I've said in the past has future NHL captain written all over him, this is a guy who treats everybody with respect, handles answers in a calm, rational manner. These are the kind of guys that you're looking for. Adam Lowry is another guy who steps into that role. Nate Schmidt, who's locked down for a little while longer, is another guy that I think you have to take a look at. Those are the kind of players. I think there needs to be a realization that not just these guys are our leaders and therefore they wear A's. I think there needs to be a little more thought put into these are the guys who are going to have a conversation representing this team, not just with the media, but with the fans. And I think that that's a very important distinction because I think that we can see based on the way that ticket sales have gone recently, I do think that there's a disconnect that has grown between the Winnipeg Jets fans and the Winnipeg Jets organization. And now more than ever is a time to try and get players who know how to best have a conversation with fans and make fans feel like they are being drawn in. So those players that I mentioned, I think are top of the list. Again, I think that, he could handle it. Kyle Connor would be able to handle the situation. I think you want guys who want to handle the situation, who want to steer that conversation. And I just don't know that Kyle Connor is the most, likely candidate to want to do that. Nick Ehlers, as you said, is another one as well. This is a guy who loves to talk with Winnipeg Jets fans, with the media, and who's like brutal and direct. And I think that that's something that the Jets could use. So those are some guys I think you brought up. Really, really good.
Lowry again.
Yeah, I think I mentioned Lowry off the top. Here's a direction I wanted to go in. I'm going to give you the first crack at it. But I take a look at the situation that we find Rick Bowness in, and I can't help but think addressing this room, and it sounds like it was tried. Blake Wheeler mentioned that it was tried, but we talked so much, and this kind of turns the page on that a little bit, but we talked so much about a summer that we expected a lot of turnover on this roster, and it never happened. I personally think what we saw here is the first bit of Rick Bowness picking up the responsibility of addressing this room after a summer in which Kevin Cheveldayoff was not able to address the room based on changes of the roster. I'm going to throw that idea out there. You can run at it, and when you're done, I'll take a run at it.
Yeah, for me, again, I think that my opinion on this is quite well established.
Different than mine?
No, I wouldn't say it's different, but my opinion is that in a season where there's been a lot of losing and underachieving, I'm not in the group that thinks that the Jets have this big fractured room and they have no chance of getting back to getting to be a group that gets along or whatever. It's very simple. If your team wins, you get along just great. There can be some issues during the season, but winning makes everything better. I think a lot of the personalities are the same as 2019, obviously, or 2018. Yes, there's some key pieces that are gone from that group, of course. But in terms of people getting along, I don't see the Jets being this, pool of, I don't see there being a ton of bad people in that room, nor do I see a lot of people that hate one another or don't get along. I think that if they play better, they're going to get along better, just like they did when they were having winning seasons. What I do think is that, there's a different direction that's being taken. I think the other thing about bringing Rick Bowness in and Rick establishing himself as the guy in charge right out of the gate and saying you're all starting at, it's one thing to say you're all starting at square one. This is a flat out obvious example of that actually happening, right? this is not how things were done in the past. This is how we're doing them now. This is how we're moving forward. So he's done that now with the leadership group. The next thing he does that with, Sean, is ice time. So if you're David Gustafsson or Jansen Harkins, you're not locked into being a 5 to 7 minute a game player. If you're Mark Scheifele, if you want to be playing 22 to 24 minutes, don't be dogging it in one end of the ice, or you won't be getting 22 to 24 minutes. And for the guys in the middle that think they should deserve a bigger role, now it's time for you to show what role you deserve. That's up front, that's on the back end, that's everywhere. So to me, you're not only are you setting a message in terms of the leadership group, you're setting a message saying, this is a new coaching staff. This is how we are going to act. And now it's up to you to show us what you deserve. So to me, that's what makes training camp so interesting to me. And I know this is not the direction you wanted to take it necessarily by the question, but for me, that's why it's interesting. Who's with whom? Where does Wheeler start? Where's Cole Perfetti? Who's with Scheifele? Who's with Dubois? What are you doing there? What about are you doing a top 9 or a top 6, middle 6? Is your fourth line have a bunch more skill? You got Sam Gagner. Do you have him with Gustafsson? Is he with Harkins? Is he with Barron? Where are those guys at? Is there another player coming in that can win the third line role? Or is it Harkins or Barron? I'm super curious. I've said this before. I think you start Dubois and Connor together. I think you start Scheifele and Ehlers together. I think you start Perfetti on that line with Scheifele. I think you start Wheeler with Dubois because they've had success together. After that, wow, let's see what happens. Let's see what happens on the back end. And let's see a move happen, whether that's before training camp or before the regular season. Because let's be honest, Sean, the Jets can't roll into the season with this many veteran defensemen if they want to incorporate those young players that are ready to play at the NHL level.
That was a lot of really good, important information coming from Ken. Doesn't mean that he didn't duck the question, but I'm going to take on the question that Ken didn't want to take on.
I'm sick of talking about last year. I'm sick about talking about the room. I'm sick of talking about 2019. I want to see what happens going forward.
That's not the question. I'm going to handle the question here. The question is the idea that did this, and I think there's two ways of looking at this. The question is essentially, is Rick Bowness now stepping up to clean up the issue of last year? The new guy walks in, and he said it himself. Something went wrong in that room. I don't know what, because I wasn't here, but there was problems in that room, and he's stepping up to clean that up. The first opportunity to clean that up was by Kevin Cheveldayoff. If there were issues in the room, if there were personality conflicts, and I do think that we have a little bit of an answer to that question. Josh Morrissey, I talked to him at his Dream Factory tournament a little while ago, had said this to me, like, we're a really close room. Like, we're like,
right.
And so I think for them, there's even a little bit of an issue on, like, we don't know what went wrong here, because it's not like we're at each other's throats. It's not like we hate each other. We get along really well, but we can't seem to figure this out. But that doesn't mean that the first crack at righting this room, which, make no mistake about it, today's announcement and Rick Bowness doing what he's doing is a step to right the room. The first opportunity to do that was personnel changes by Kevin Cheveldayoff, and we know he tried to make them. He didn't get them done. So there's two ways of looking at this in my mind. One way is to say Kevin Cheveldayoff was not able to do what a general manager could do in this situation to correct the room. He wasn't able to do it, and then he left it to his coach, and now Rick Bowness begins the heavy lifting of turning around a room that had issues last year, and all those issues return because there was not the changes that were expected. Now, Rick Bowness, it's like we said right off the bat, this is no small move. Rick Bowness walked in, talked to a bunch of players, decided that there was a problem in that room, and took the longtime captain out of his seat and is now auditioning people to be leaders. Who wants to step up? That is a bold stroke for one of the first things that you do as a coach. Like, say what you want, maybe it'll work, maybe it won't, but Rick Bowness just walked in and showed everyone that he has big brass cojones, okay? That's one thing that is certain here. But another way to look at this, and credit has to go where credit is due, Kevin Cheveldayoff went out and hired Rick Bowness. And maybe Kevin Cheveldayoff walked out at the beginning of the season and said, I don't know that under the constraints of how I'm working, that I am going to be able to make the changes that would affect this room or that would change the chemistry in this room. I don't know that the market is there, or I don't know that I can make these moves without us becoming a less talented team. So what I am going to do is I am going to get a lock, stock, and two smoking barrels perfect safety net, because I think regardless of who I bring back, Rick Bowness is going to be able to handle the situation. So on one hand, you could look at this as Rick Bowness is cleaning up the mess that Kevin Cheveldayoff could not clean up. Or you could say the mess is a challenge to clean up, and Kevin Cheveldayoff went out and got the right guy to take care of it if he was not able to do what he wanted to do in the offseason. And again, we know, because Blake Wheeler said it today, there were attempts by Kevin Cheveldayoff to make a big shakeup of this room, because there was a conversation with Blake Wheeler about him playing elsewhere. It didn't come to fruition, but in the end, Rick Bowness has now taken charge. He's the one with the, behind the wheel, and that's the situation we're looking at right now. Do you have anything to add? I guess he doesn't, because he just...
Sorry, I got a call coming in. What I think about that, Sean, is simple. I think Rick Bowness walked into Kevin Cheveldayoff's office and told him that I can win with this group. That's why there were no changes.
No way.
Yes,
well,
there's no way that this whole offseason was going to hinge on whether or not the Jets could trade Blake Wheeler or not. I mean, if Kevin thought he had to change everything else, he would have made some other moves. So to me, I think Rick went in and told him that he can win.
Okay, so that is your opinion.
Sorry.
I think there was a definite. I don't think that the Jets had plans and Rick Bowness walked in and put a stop to all of that. I think that Rick Bowness is saying, okay, well, you tried, didn't work, but I'm going to make the best of it. I think that that's the more likely scenario here. I don't think for a second that the Jets had grand plans to make changes and that those plans were stopped by Rick Bowness.
No, what I just said is that if Rick Bowness thought they should overhaul the roster, they would have overhauled the roster. That's what I think.
I disagree with you. I think they tried to overhaul the roster, and I don't think they like their return. I think that's what stopped it. Rick Bowness is not the brakes on this situation. The situation is, I mean, it's conversations that I've had behind the scenes. The Jets did not like the return that they were going to get when they talked about making these big swings. So I will say this, and maybe this is closer to the point that this brings me closer to the point that you're trying to make. I think Rick Bowness said, well, I mean, don't do that. Like, if you give me these guys, I think I can make something out of them. But I still do think this is a scenario under which a room that everyone, including yourself, expected big changes out of didn't happen, because I don't think that the general manager was able to get those big changes done, and not because his coach said, whoa, stop what you're doing. I think it's because he tried, didn't like what he saw, and now the coach said, fine, give me what we got, and I'll go make the best of it.
No, so here's my point, Sean. If the Jets wanted to trade Brendan Dillon this summer, they could have traded him. They don't want to trade Brendan Dillon. So that's why they still have a backup on the back end, on the logjam. If they wanted to trade Nikolai Ehlers to change the core, they could have. They don't want to trade Nikolai Ehlers. Is it possible that Blake wanted out and the Jets wanted to move Blake? Yes, but I don't think that moving Blake Wheeler would have been the one and only solution for the Winnipeg Jets trying to change the complexion of the roster. We know that Kevin Cheveldayoff offered more money to Calle Yarncroke and Danton Heinen, but those are complementary players. If the Jets thought they needed to change their core, they would have changed the core. That's my opinion. I know you don't agree, but that's how I feel. If they wanted to change the core, they would have changed 3 or 4 pieces.
They chose not to. The core for the sake of the core. We're talking about, like, the whole issue that we're talking about that has been stated. There was a problem in the room last year. So you don't just overhaul the core for the sake of overhauling the core and move willy-nilly guys out like Nick Ehlers just to make changes. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that there would have been certain changes to make to address that core. And I believe the Jets tried to make those changes. and they didn't like what was coming back. So I don't think this is, I guess another way to put this is it's, the Jets are saying right now, and I think you have to say this. If you're Rick Bowness, you have to say this. If you're Josh Morrissey, you have to say this. If you're any player on the Winnipeg Jets at this stage, you have to give a vote of confidence and say, I know we're getting the same team back as last year, but I believe in this team. But I think that's what they're left saying after the changes they tried to make didn't materialize. And I think that's a big distinction.
Sure.
Anyway,
I think the Jets' biggest problem in the room is that they didn't know how to defend. And if the Jets try to defend a little better or play a system that they're comfortable playing in, then they're going to get along just fine, just was what Josh Morrissey said to you. So
you didn't think that effort in certain areas was a big reason that they couldn't defend as well as they
chose not to. Effort is a choice, Sean. Effort is a choice.
But that's not a bad defensive scheme. Like the lack of effort is the biggest issue that I'm hearing here. I know you're saying defense, but if they're not trying as hard as they need to be trying, that's the biggest problem. You're not going to get anywhere.
But that doesn't mean you have a bad room. That means you have guys who weren't bought in enough, and that could lead to a variety of other issues. But I mean, we'll see. Ultimately, we'll see. I mean, the Jets could struggle, but I don't think it's as simple as saying the Jets have a mediocre. They're right now a mushy middle team, but that's not to say that they couldn't improve. I mean, I think Connor Hellebuyck is a humongous key to this season. I think that I've spoken to people who have been around Connor Hellebuyck this summer. They see a different Connor Hellebuyck than the one that we saw last year, and I think that the conversation that we're going to have when we're checking receipts in 2 months, I think we're going to be checked. Things could be interesting is all I'm going to say there.
I'm loving this show. I'm loving the debate right now. And I'm loving the divorce lawyer
back on.
We should actually, maybe we should go and be looking out for a law office.
I don't think so. I think we're good.
Who can sponsor the show? That would be great. Hey, last question I want to get to before we get out of here. I wonder, and we've talked about this, and Blake Wheeler talked about it today, about the idea of the captaincy, and I think it was your question, the captaincy weighing on him, where he fully admitted that it did. Now, he also said that, this is maybe the greatest honor of his career, that he was named a captain in the NHL. But again, he talked about the idea of it weighing on him, and he talked in the past. I mean, I still remember one of the best, I think, scrums that we ever had with him was the time that he was talking about Winnipeg Jets fans needing to pump their brakes, and he'd go pick up his kids at school and he'd have other kids asking him if they're going to win the Stanley Cup this year. And that at that time, he talked about that weighing on him. And it's been, I think a recurring theme throughout his time in Winnipeg as the Jets captain about the weight of carrying that C. So I pose this question to you. What kind of freedom do you think not wearing the C is going to give Blake Wheeler, and how do you think his game responds?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is again, this is one of the, Blake can be incredibly reflective, and he was today at times. He gives you need a decoder when Blake speaks, because he gives you part of it, and then you have to read between the lines for the rest. So there were some things he was very open talking about, some things he didn't want to talk about. I thought his answer to my question was exceptional. I thought he gave you a glimpse of, how important it was to him. He basically said outside of being a husband and a father, it was the thing that brought him the most joy, but also carried the biggest responsibility in his life. And I think that wrestling match between when to let the happy-go-lucky side be free and clear and when he needed to kind of put the hammer down, I think that got in the way of him enjoying the sport of hockey. Blake is an exceptional hockey player. He's done it for an incredibly long time. I expect him to have a very solid season. I also think people think when I say Blake Wheeler's ice time goes down, that doesn't mean his production goes down. People will say, oh, well, Blake's not going to get his empty net points, blah, blah, blah. If Blake plays less, he might be able to give you more. This is a guy who only knows one speed. When you get to be 35, 36 years old, even if you are exceptionally fit like Blake is, it takes a toll on the body. If you're playing less and you're still giving all that you have in that time, as long as you're producing on the power play, I still think that Blake will have a solid season. Whether that season is 60 points or 80 points, I don't know. But if you think that Blake Wheeler is going to somehow become a 40-point player and not have an impact on the team, I don't think you're paying attention. And I don't mean you, Sean. I mean the royal you in this situation. Is it possible that his game dips a bit at 36 years old? Of course it's possible. But Blake is a smart person. He is a very proud individual. And back to what we talked about before, having the pressure of not being captain removed from his broad shoulders might actually help him just get some enjoyment out of the game. This is a guy who loves hockey. He grew up wanting to play for the Minnesota Golden Gophers. His dream wasn't to play in the NHL until he basically got to high school and was drafted 5th overall. He said it today. He never dreamed of being an NHL captain. That doesn't mean that this doesn't hurt his feelings. Of course it would hurt your feelings if someone said you were the captain and now you're not. Of course it would. And it should. Because you care. That means that you care about it. So to me, Blake is not going to care less about hockey because he's not wearing a letter. So it's obviously up to him to continue to set an example. I expect Blake is going to be a productive player. I mean, to your original point, is Blake going to be with the Jets in 2 years? That's a question that I cannot answer. But I expect Blake to be an important player for the Jets this year, and I expect him to fit in. And that could be more difficult than it sounds, but Blake's just going to show up to the rink, and I think actually he's going to enjoy hockey more for probably the first time in 5 years. I was there the day when he got named captain. I've never seen Blake happier, but I've also never seen him as close to that happy ever since. So to me, I think this is something that can help him in the big picture. It's one of those short-term pain for longer to medium-term gain. And I think it's something that the organization is going to look back and say, that was a hard decision, but it was probably the right decision for both the player and for the organization. And that goes back to your original point before. Sometimes other people were being treated differently than others. This is sort of the show. It's a level playing field. There's a new sheriff in town, and let's see where this goes from here.
I'm glad you ended on that point because I'm a little torn on how I think this is going to respond for Blake Wheeler, because I'll say this. You brought up the empty net points, and at one point it was like, I don't think this is last year included, but the previous couple of years, you were talking about the top 5 in the league in empty net goals and assists and points. And I think it was like Scheifele and Wheeler were 1 and 2. And I think Kyle Connor was number 4. I mean, those players were given every bit of opportunity to try and spike their points in that situation. And that was, if you're talking about dangling carrots, that was not a carrot that was dangled to players that had a really good game that game. Patrick Laine, a guy who in years past was, duking it out to be one of the highest scoring players in the league, didn't really get that opportunity that you would expect to go to the guy who's leading the team in scoring so that you could spike those numbers and maybe get him 40. I know he reached 44, but up to 50 goals. You never know how that would have affected it. I also do think that, and now maybe this will happen again, because I will say this, Blake Wheeler, I look at him and at his age, he is still a massively effective player when he's given time and space. And so that happens on the power play. The Winnipeg Jets power play has never stopped running through Blake Wheeler. The entire idea of how they score is to get Blake the puck and Blake draw the defense out of a good position, move the puck, and then get that secondary or that third assist. So Blake gets a lot of his points either on the power play or empty net wise. Now, to your point, if his responsibilities are going down, does he get those opportunities as much? So I see how things go with him this year as being a real balance, a real seesaw between he doesn't have as much responsibility as a captain. Does that free him? Does that make him a freer player? And does that lead to him creating more opportunity for himself? Versus, how is this new coaching group going to handle him? Is he going to get every opportunity to score the empty net goal or get a extra point on the empty net goal? Are they going to continue to run the primary power play through Blake Wheeler so that he gets more touches than everybody else, and in doing so get more opportunity to get points on that? Because I think if you take away the power play points and if you take away the empty net points, the points don't look quite like what we've expected them to look like. And what I do wonder is how that looks. If he's not used in a manner that he's been able to get a lot of points in the past, and it affects his points. I wonder how that response is, right? We're talking about him being freed because he doesn't have the captaincy anymore, but does he get weighed down on the other hand by maybe there not being the opportunity that's been there in the past under the Paul Maurice regime? I think this is one of those we'll have to wait and see kind of questions. But I'll say this. They've already gone down the road. They've already had the conversation with Blake Wheeler about moving on and moving out of town. It didn't happen. But once that conversation has happened once, it's not too hard to broach that conversation again. And this just adds for me another element of another player that there's a big question mark about his future with the Winnipeg Jets. Pierre-Luc Dubois, as you mentioned it before, would have been one of the prime guys that you would put a letter on. But given the question marks that surround his future with the Winnipeg Jets, that's not going to happen. I just think this becomes that much more of a does Blake Wheeler end his career with the Winnipeg Jets or even end this contract that he has signed with the Winnipeg Jets? To me, those question marks just got a lot bigger and a lot fatter today. You have anything to say before we check out?
No. Do you have the Johnson Group logo?
I do. I just wanted to say before we do go, thanks so much to our sponsors, and I just wanted to say to the audience again, the Bonfire Sports, the Illegal Curve guys, Winnipeg Sports Talk. We are all operating in a space that we need whatever help we can get. And if you appreciate the conversations that we're having and that you're a part of, I hope you too appreciate the businesses that are investing in that happening. And one of those businesses, of course, that's been supporting us for a long time now is the Johnson Group, who are a Winnipeg-owned and operated company that provides employee benefit solutions to companies from 1 employee to 10,000 or more. Over 30,000 Canadian businesses trusted Johnson Group with their employee benefit needs through various products, including the Chambers Plan, Maximum Benefit, and Sign Up. Johnson Group is a platinum member of Canada's best managed companies and named one of Manitoba's top employers. Whether you are a sole proprietor, part of a large organization, or an association with thousands of employees, the Johnson Group has an employee benefit solution for you. Thank you so much to them for riding with us through the summer. They joined us for a lot of our shows then, and are back on the show here today. Thank you so much to them, and thank you to you, the audience, for jumping in. I see right now, right to the bitter end here, 172 people in watching this. We're just blown away by your support, and it's so much fun to be back. You know, this happened today, and I texted Ken right away and said, Kenny and Renny pop-up show, are we going to do this? And Ken was all over it. And I know that he, like me, is into it because this is one of our favorite places to be, is here talking with each other, arguing with each other, and talking with all of you. So thank you so much for tuning in. Oh, yeah, it was a little bit arguing. I love it. I love a spirited response in a conversation like that. But to all of you who tuned in, we really appreciate it. We can't wait to get going so that we're doing this fully and consistently. Going to start that up right away here. So thank you for being with us. We hope you enjoyed your summer, and we can't wait to talk to you again. Thank you so much, everybody.